Innate helps companies avoid project surprises, make better informed decisions, share knowledge, and deliver better outcomes. Innate, transforming the way the world builds.
Hello, project people. Welcome back to a brand new episode of the Project Chatter podcast. It's always great to have you with us. And we've got an interesting setup this time. Dale and Martin in the same room physically. Amazing. How are you guys?
Yeah, we're good. Are you jealous, Val? I mean, you know.
I am, sort of.
You're a little bit far away, but it's absolutely boiling in the UK. I think it's mid-30s in London, and I can literally smell the factor 50 on Martin.
Yeah, it's about time to be ginger in the UK at the moment.
That's the other weird thing is you guys have got better weather than us in Australia, which is bizarre, absolutely bizarre, and not fun at all watching you guys have fun in Europe in summer. But look, let's get the guest in. Mathilde Rubia. I think I got that right. Hopefully I did.
Ruby will be good enough also.
Oh, yeah. We'll do an extra cut. Yeah, we'll do something later. Mathilde, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. Yeah, good. It's a bit early, but yeah, and really cold, even though I'm in Brisbane. So trying to make the most of it.
I'm so sorry, but we have to accommodate for our English friends, and that means it's 6 o'clock in the morning in Australia. But look, it's great to have you here, and this is an interesting topic, and I think for our UK colleagues, it's a new term, so we haven't really defined it. And I think for Australia, it's a bit of a common term now. It's definitely picked up pace, and it's used almost every other day in our work, Mathilde, isn't it? We might want to start with, what is it first, and maybe then we'll go into a bit about yourself. So what is digital engineering in your capacity?
Yeah, so what's funny is that there's no standard definition of digital engineering. So depending on the document that you read and the region that you're in, you might have your local flavor. So that adds to the complexity of it. But basically, it's the convergence of building information modeling, BIM, information management, GIS, a little bit of asset management. I think the best way to describe it is trying to leverage information, data, and technology to enable better decision making for project delivery and for asset management. That's how I will go about it.
Yeah, when we don't do halves in Australia, we do everything. So we have to pile everything together and consolidate it and squeeze it until no one knows what it is. But it does sound like there's a lot of work in there. But how did you get into that, Mathilde? Where did you start? What's your history?
So I actually started as a structural engineer. So I was doing reinforced concrete and steel structure calculation in the Middle East. And then after 3 years, I realized that it wasn't really for me, that my passion wasn't really in structural engineering. So at that time, I was actually a graduate. So I had the opportunity to do a graduate rotation. And as part of that, I discovered the world of digital engineering and digital system. And I was like, that sounds cool. This is what I want to do. Because I've experienced firsthand, being a structural engineer, having to duplicate information, reproduce stuff in between, like having a 3D model that then you reproduce in your finite element analysis software, and you spend about 3 weeks transferring information. And I thought that could be a bit more efficient. So that's how I ended up into it. So for the past 5 or 6 years, I've been doing different role in digital engineering, both on product side and then more implementation, then sort of advisory work. Yeah,
beautiful. And does that digital engineering also include that digital twin component? Because that's probably more common language used and internationally.
So yeah, so it includes all the foundational elements, and then you can put them together to do a digital twin if it's what you want to do. You can do digital asset management also if it's what you're targeting. You can do a whole raft of applications, but the fundamentals are the same,
I always find, and I don't know about the boys, and jump in, guys, because I know some of this is a new topic for you. One more from me, but I find it interesting because it's now merged into its kind of own sport, a bit like what Project Controls did, Dale and Martin, some time back. It became its own independent kind of craft. And I find it interesting because depending on who you ask, which is a really good way to start, Mathilde, it's sort of engineering, it's sort of information management. There's sort of a project management, project controls piece in there. There's sort of a digital element to it that that is really hard to define where it sits in the kind of the hierarchy of an organizational structure on a project. Where does it sit? What's your preference, or where do you think it should sit?
That's a bit of a rough one because I would say it depends on projects and on things.
Yeah.
But I would say that it needs to be at project level or even attached to the PMO. I think that's where you can make the most, progress and results on it. Just because once you attach it to a PMO being a project or a program management office, you can then integrate with project control, which is one of the key benefits, I think, of digital engineering, and one of the things that is very interesting and maybe also a bit of a missed opportunity on a lot of projects at the moment. And secondly, you can have that consistency then across the project, because otherwise each packages are doing their own thing, but they're so focused on, the more technical element and hands-on element of clash detection and making sure that the design is coordinated and that the model is correct and all this and all that, that we miss out on completely the consistency and benefit on having this project-wide or program-wide view. But it's a tough question because I don't think that anyone had cracked it at the moment. I think also the variety of skills and interpretation about what digital engineering does and the scope and what is included and what is excluded also massively influence, where it needs to sit in an organization and then what you can do out of it. To my knowledge, there's no digital engineering degree, for example, fresh off, in university. So you can't just say, okay, well, now this is the curriculum. There's stuff related to BIM, stuff related to information management. BIM sits in civil engineering degree or construction degree, but information management sits with ICT, for example.
Yeah, it's I think because it's still early days, right? I don't know how long it's been around for.
Well, BIM has been the first BIM standard has been formalized in 2007. So it's been around for 15 years, even more, before it got formalized into a standard. But come on, that's enough, 15 years is a
crazy.
generation.
15 years, yeah, that's long. And we still don't have, I mean, that gives you an example of our institutions, right? And how we were talking about this on another pod, and I don't remember which one, Dale will. And, just the speed in which education is not fast enough for the I guess the revelations and the evolution of projects to date. And 15 years, I mean, come on, guys, we should. And we've had, haven't we, Mathilde? We've had senior projects, major projects come to us and ask for understandings of capability. How do we actually get people onboarded with digital engineering? And it reminds me very much of project controls, because we're all project control folks. The same thing. It's been around for, I don't know how long, probably about the same year. And the same thing it's been a bit of a curse trying to get people understanding what project controls is, because it touches a little bit of everything. But this new digital engineering now brings in, a bit of engineering, a bit of asset, a bit of IM, ICT, and a bit of digital. So it's a very exciting space to be, but I won't talk anymore because I'm just as passionate as you are, Mathilde, about this subject. But let's get the boys in. Dale, Martin, any questions?
I'm hell of a interested here, Mathilde, because you say it's something new. And does a digital engineer job spec exist?
Well, if you go on LinkedIn, you can find a lot of, job spec, but they cover a variety and a range of options that are absolutely massive. Some of them are really focused on the more hands-on technical aspect, of doing clash detection and setting up like Revit or Model or, whatever software, managing a CD, setting that up. And some are more in sort of advisory space, at the more strategic level, writing like information requirement documents and all those kind of things. And then there's some that try to target everything in between. So there is some common element in terms of you need to have a knowledge of the ISO 19650, which is the standard for BIM, the ISO standard for BIM, building information modeling or information management. The timing or, the terminology keep changing. And then some local flavor of the code. Like, for example, if you're in Australia and you're in Victoria, you might want to be familiar with Victorian Digital Asset Strategy, VIDAS. There's the Transport for New South Wales Digital Engineering Framework in New South Wales. And there's different interpretation. Singapore have their own BIM requirement and all that. So there is that common terminology that BIM and information management will form part of it. But then all the sort of plugging in terms of GIS or survey or 3D modeling or asset management, all that, it's up to the need of the organization and the project, really.
That's interesting because that actually leaves a hell of a lot of opportunity if you think about it, right? Because it's yet to be defined, you can have multiple digital engineering roles: digital engineer consultant, digital engineer advisor, digital systems engineer. I don't know, I'm just making it all up, right? But there's such a wide variety and it's not yet defined, which makes it quite interesting within itself. So my next question would be, if you had to write a generic job description for digital engineer, what would you have on it? So those listening go, oh, I've got those elements, I've got those elements, but I don't have those. So it kind of gives them a bit of a broad spectrum to go, what might a digital engineer look like? Or more specifically, what are the generic skill sets that you look for that could potentially be transferable? So you're saying, could a digital engineer come from project controls, come from the engineering space, come from finance, can be a project manager, all of the above. But there will probably be some elements missing if you had to look at the digital engineer job description.
Yeah, I think I will start with people who have an understanding of project delivery, the life cycle, but also of design management, because digital engineering really starts in that phase, and you need to have a good understanding of how design is created, I think, to be quite proficient and to understand what you're trying to put. So people who have experience, as being like an engineer or an architect or project manager, managing design phase, or also even the construction phase, I think they have a bit of a head start, just because they understand broadly the concept and the constraint between the two. I would also say, back to banging that drum, but the ISO 19650, you can do like courses and short courses and certification online, really quick module, about 20 hours. So I would say that this is probably also one of the prerequisites. A couple of things also that I think are quite important is having this appetite for technology and for change and for improvement. How can we make any process more efficient? I think that that's a good skill, whether you're coming from project control and you're really focusing on integration of digital engineering and project control, like BIM 4D and 5D, about integrating time and cost into a 3D model. It's all about trying to say, okay, where is at the moment the fact that we duplicate information, or we have something not efficient, or we have a risk of having manual error or discrepancies in data, one data set telling you everything is fine on the project, one telling you it's actually not so good. How do you make sure that you have, a source of truth, those kind of things? So I think if you're in that mindset, then you can pick up the more hardcore and technical skills. You can always go on to training, you can do on-the-job training, you can even go on masterclass, or even, if you're really keen on your own time, try to play with software. So I wouldn't necessarily attach to a specific technology. It's true that if you have background in the big names across the industry, Autodesk Suite Product or Bentley or all that, that's definitely a plus. But I wouldn't necessarily, make that as a mandatory, more like a desirable on my job description. And I think also another thing that's quite good is people who know how to approach change management and business change management, because digital engineering, it's all about that. It's new enough in the industry that I think, especially in Australia, in the UK, you're a bit more advanced, but it's new enough that people need to be brought onto the journey. And I think having some sort of softer skills that help you manage that change and interact with people and really support them during that transition phase, it's quite critical to be successful.
Awesome. And here comes my first challenge. So you've said a lot of broad skills there, I think, borrowed from a lot of the different types of roles we find on projects today. And are we potentially saying that maybe this isn't a single role, maybe it is a team, digital engineering, and that we can't actually define the digital engineer? And so maybe I've given you the unenviable task of trying to break it down, which, as we know, sometimes we shouldn't do. We shouldn't break things down into simple forms. So is it then maybe not a role, and we shouldn't try and put it in a box? And therefore, by that very notion, we should be looking at digital engineering teams and the makeup of that team rather than an individual?
I think that's the best approach. It's really similar to project control. Your project control is usually a team because there's people specialize in planning and then in risk and then in cost and governance and different aspects of it. I think for digital engineering, if you want to have people that are very proficient, I think it's a bit unreasonable to expect someone to be good in 3D modeling, but also GIS, but also in survey, and then be also an expert in asset data. And then on top of that, have all the soft skills and the technical skills to write all the documentation and all that, at some point you have to draw the line. So exactly that. What I found works best is having that as a team. And then you can have people that maybe are more doing that task of management and trying to bring consistency and having the procedure. And then you have people a bit more technical that actually can support technically the team doing those different processes. You can have GIS expert, you can then have, 3D modeler and all that. And then the trick is to make sure that then the role and responsibility are really, clearly defined, as every time you have a team. But I think that's the best way to overall having a good results, and then tapping into also people's strengths rather than trying to have someone that needs to do everything, in such a broad spectrum. I don't think it's very realistic. Or if you have someone like that, then you probably have one of the top gun in the industry. So, hold on tight to them and give them a raise because they are rare to come by.
No, that's excellent. I just wonder then, so, and this is me trying to be a little bit provocative and tell me to stop being a dick, that's okay as well. I just wonder then, if I challenge it and go, well, isn't that just doing what we do on projects today, but adding the digital element to it in its simple form? Isn't that all we're doing?
Well, I think that this mentality is exactly why the progress is so slow to date. Because it's not just about saying like, oh, we're going to keep doing what we've done in 2D and just do it in 3D, same. Actually, it's a more fundamental change, because it means that the way you view information and data needs to be completely different. And I think it's back to my point about change management. People need to understand, and then the source of truth is going to change. The model is not just something on the side to visualize and keep the client happy and make sure that we have pretty picture on the billboard around the site. It's supposed to be the source of information. So as a planner, as a cost engineer, as a risk person, you're supposed to go into that model, longer term, that's the vision, to look into an area and say, oh, actually, this one is really risky. And then health and safety come on top and say, yeah, it's a really tight space. Let's try to figure out how we're going to build it, or maintain it before we actually send people and incur the risk of an accident or an incident. Same for planning, oh, let's do a little bit of rehearsal and actually figure out that, oh, well, with this zone that we allocated for storage is being used for 2 different purposes at the same time. And therefore that's not going to work. So, our planning is unrealistic by default. Yeah, it's really wider. It's people having to rethink their entire processes. And I think that's why it's so challenging. And that's why maybe adoption has been so slow, because people are time crunching project. I've never seen a project to date saying like, oh, no, plenty of time. It's always start like that. And then suddenly you're 2 years late and everyone is scrambling around. People are busy delivering or busy doing the day-to-day job, and they don't have this capacity sometimes for change and to actually just sit down and say, okay, if I take a week to assess how I'm getting my information, my input and output, mapping a bit my processes, and then realizing that I can cut a lot of manual effort or increase the accuracy and the certainty of and the quality of my data just by using digital engineering, and then try to use those processes, that would be great. But people don't have the bandwidth to do that. And there's also people who don't necessarily at the moment see the need for doing that, quite content doing their job day in, day out, 20 years been doing the same and they do it very well. So they don't see the need for change. But I do think that it's more fundamental than just saying like, oh, check a little bit of tech or whatever on top, and then you're doing, digital engineering. The example of it is also the fact that when Beam came up into the industry, it came up from building services, so more like, building environment and projects. And everyone thought that just because they had Autodesk Revit on their project, they were doing Beam. That was like, yeah, that's it. It's actually not that, because Beam is a process, is a concept, like a philosophy almost, if you want. And you can do a lot of it strictly if you want by the book. I'm a strong advocate of saying that you can do it without technology. For example, a common data environment, which is, CD, source of truth, is a way of managing your information and segregating in work in progress, shared, publish, and archive. And then you give access to different people at different stage, if you want, of that information. But if you really want to do that, you can do it with 4 filing cabinets. And then the work in progress, you put all the architectural drawing that people are drawing manually, and the key is only given to the architectural team. Then you have the shared. So when the senior architect reviewed and say, yeah, it's good enough, they physically take that drawing and put it into the shared filing cabinet. And the shared filing cabinet, the architecture, but also the structural and the mechanical team have the key of that filing cabinet, so they can access that information, and then publish. It's the same filing cabinet, but for a different one where you put information and the client has the key because it's ready for the client, That works. Like, to my book, this is textbook CDE, so I would approve that. Is it the best efficient one? Probably not, but I would say it's a CDE, So it's not just because you're plastering a BIM 360 or an Aconex or a ProjectWise onto your project that suddenly you're compliant. And I think that's where the misconception come from. People think it's just a technology piece, when actually it's more fundamental than that.
Now, very well answered, very well answered. And those that go, they'll stop being a dick now. Mathilde's got all the answers to everything. And I am totally with her, and I understand this, and I want to learn more. Where can those go to find these communities of people that actually are like-minded and want to move into the space? Because let's face it, as you say, there is a struggle, there is a challenge on adoption. And the only way to really educate yourself is to surround yourself by people that know more about the subject matter than you. So are there communities, whether that be online or potentially in person, that people can go to? I mean, other than listening to the Project Chatter podcast, which everyone loves to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, so there's different communities. I don't have an extensive list, but there's a couple that spring to mind. For example, you have BIM board all across the world. So for example, for people in Australia, New Zealand, there's the Australasian BIM board, and they have like chapter in each city. So you have Bris BIM for Brisbane, you have also Mel BIM for Melbourne, all those kind of things. And they do, it's an online community, but they also do in-person events about once a quarter, so that's quite good. You have a lot of information online actually, and free to use. For BIM, you can go to B1M, for very sort of introductory level videos. They have a lot about what is information management, what is building information modeling, what is also CD, those kind of key concepts. You have the Center for Digital Build Britain, CDBB, that has a hell lot of information. It's almost information overload, so you might want to be a bit careful when you start on that, because you can really go down the rabbit hole and spend your whole day. But they have fantastic resources. It's all free. They really try to be sort of the open source concept of really giving back to the community, so people submit article and white paper and case studies and all that. There's Digital Twin Hub as part of CDBB also, that's quite good. Well, as the name mentioned, it's really focused on digital twin, but there's a good like foundational element also on, what to expect in terms of GIS and BIM and all that. A lot of the software also manufacturer in terms of, Autodesk and Bentley and Revit, so Bluebeam. I'm not going to mention all of them, so don't get upset if people listen to it and work for another company, but they provide a lot of also free webinar and resources, on different aspects tailored to their product, but they have some good experts. So I think there's definitely a wealth of information online. especially coming from the UK, just because you have this BIM level 2 mandate. So you're a bit more mature, a bit more advanced, and there's really a push from the government to really upskill the industry as a whole, and make sure that everyone has a piece of it, rather than just being a competitive advantage. So they are really keen on that sharing of information. And then, on LinkedIn, there's a couple of groups around BIM, information management, digital engineering, all those kind of things. So it's also a good source of information. Like, I would recommend just try to, find a few people that are in that space, follow them, see the article that they share, all that can give you an insight on where they're at and, what they're thinking are in the industry.
Awesome. And two names that jump in. James Bowles will give a shout out to you in that space, and Christina Henkai we've had on before as well. I think Chris Needham, and one other, I forget his name, is based in the East. DJ, that's it. Hey DJ, I didn't forget about
DJ
you.
Gibbs. DJ Gibbs, mate. Shout out to you as well.
Exactly.
I think Mathilde's part of the Zero Construct team as well.
Right.
She's
awesome.
her hand up for the Australian chapter with me. So we are well immersed, aren't we, Mathilde?
Yeah, it's a really cool initiative. I think it's the next level of maturity actually for digital engineering and BIM, looking at sustainability. We have all this information from the model. We are using it for time and cost. What else can we use it for? And I think sustainability is the next big thing we need to tackle. We need to understand the impact. It needs to drive decision making on saying, like, we need to make decision now on, the way we do it for time and cost along the life cycle. We need to make it by sustainability requirements. There's no point doing something that is cheap and, easily maintained if you have to change it every 2 years and it produces like massive waste or embodied carbon. Like, it's not sustainable. We can't afford it anymore.
No,
So,
absolutely.
really excited about this one.
No, it's hugely exciting, and I think we've got James coming on in a couple of weeks' time, so it'll be exciting to talk about that as well. But listen, there's a rumor on this episode that Machine Gun Martin's gonna give you his section in French. So
c'est pas vrai, malheureusement. So we said at the start, digital engineering is quite a fast evolving industry. How do you keep up with the latest trends, and what are some of these latest trends?
Yeah, so it's always a tricky one. As I mentioned, I try to do a bit of reading and following, like the key sort of leader and groups and see what's emerging. I think some of the new trends are really definitely around digital twin, which is trying to have a digital representation of your physical asset. And trying to use that for simulation, So now it's going to an extra level of planning, of saying, before you build something, let's try to see how it can actually work and simulate, your, and then make good decision about that. It's especially useful once we're going to have like entire digital twin of cities, for example, because then you can see how a new asset is going to interact with it. That's where, for example, Melbourne and Victoria is going with digital twin Victoria in Australia. It's pretty cool, like the vision for it is really amazing. Same for Brisbane with the Olympic in 2032. They want to have an entire mapping of the city and try to see how no new projects are going to fit together. So definitely one. Some would argue that they're already doing it, but I haven't seen a really nice example yet, or, at that scale. Smart mobility, smart cities, definitely another one that can enable, how we make life, better in terms of mobility and logistic and planning for that, or making sure that you don't put an asset right in the middle, like a massive stadium when there's no train station nearby, no bus stop, all those kind of thing, and people have to walk half an hour. Another one is really about asset management and considering now the asset on an entire sort of whole of life, approach. So instead of just saying, I don't care, I'm just designing, I don't care, I'm just building, it's actually, oh, maybe if I should care a little bit more because I can make the life for people after me easier. That would be another good one. And then the last one is zero, sustainability, all this kind of thing of saying, how do we decarbonize and make sure we make smart choices and consider the entire life cycle in terms of even the decommissioning of the asset and the structure. How is that going to work? What are we going to do with the waste? Is there a plan for it to make it pain-free and safe?
Brilliant. No, it's exciting. It's an exciting industry to be in. One question for yourself, and I'll bring in Val afterwards for your thoughts on it. As it's a fairly new industry of last 15 years that you mentioned, how do companies measure performance in digital engineering? How do we know if it's been successful? Because obviously part of your role, Val, is to go out and sell this kind of stuff to companies. And same as yourself, Mathilde, how do you know you're doing a good job? Or how would companies know they're doing a good job?
I think that's a tricky one, and I think that's one we haven't completely cracked, to be honest. I think we need to be much better in terms of benefit realization and tracking that, making sure that, there's a whole, we have a lot of research and figures about saying like percentage of saving in this and that. We take them for granted to make the, business case. And then once it's signed, it got filed into a closet and it's all hands on, hands on deck. Let's do digital engineering. We tend to not necessarily come back and actually reassess very objectively whether we've met those objectives or not, whether we surpass them in some area, So I think as an industry as a whole, we need to be better at that. In terms of more objective criteria, at the moment, the only thing that sort of exists is this certification for company called BSI CAT mark for ISO 19650. So that's basically an audit. The same way that you can be accredited for ISO 9001 for quality or 14001 for environment, you can now be accredited for building information management and information modeling. So a lot of companies are trying now to go through that audit process and get certified and then might tender certification. I think it's great because it shows that they have done the work internally in terms of upskilling and putting in place processes. I think in a few years it's going to become the baseline. So, it's the same as now 9001 doesn't mean that you're awesome in quality. It's just something that everyone has and everyone is expected to have, and then you need to build on top. So yeah, I think that would be those two ones.
And Val, yourself, your thoughts on this?
No, it's a good point. I think Mathilde hit it on the head. And it's different for each project, but sometimes they're thinking about benefits and they confine and define it between the start of the project and the end of the project, but that's not where digital engineering starts and finishes. Yeah, it potentially starts before and it potentially starts and finishes definitely after. So there's a whole of life thing that obviously the incentive for people who work in these projects isn't to deliver something, it's to deliver a product. And so when you say a digital product, that's not really in their remit. Their bonuses aren't structured that way. The only thing we can think is, I think with the sustainability angle and the benefits angle over time, that will come in as part of the project success outcomes. So we think that's where it's heading. So they're going to say, well, from now on, all projects will have a sustainability KPI. Great. How are you going to get there? Well, digital engineering will be part of that solution. Absolutely. Because it's not like you can model today in any real good form with the current existing setups. If you look at project controls and a P6 schedule, you're not going to get much out of that. Sorry, planners. But you need all these other components to kind of come together and form basically a better view so we can make more informed decisions. But Mathilde is right. I think I'd say 80% of our kind of clients are government agencies. There's a big gap in understanding. So, they're trying really hard, but obviously they require companies or agencies like the Department of Transport and Digital Twins Victoria as an example to really push. But we are seeing some change like in Victoria, as you know, Mathilde, where they're actually changing the contract provision. So much like they did in the UK, they're actually mandating now the contract provision of change, where they're saying, you will be required to comply or at least follow the Victorian digital asset strategy or the digital build policy. We saw, much like the UK with, I think it was level 2 BIM certification. So we saw the same thing happen over there. Contractors need to get on board as well. Once they have an expectation that this is coming on board, it'll be business as usual from a deliverable perspective. But then we just got to figure out, well, what does the agency do with it next? And there is a huge gap. I don't know what it's like in the rest of the world, but I know in Australia, there's a huge gap between delivering this information and receiving it. Because there's a responsibility on both sides, right? You're kind of like a data custodian. I think we've referred to that before. So whatever we start with, we also have to finish with something. And then we also have to carry it on because there's a big benefit as well. I think we're going to talk about it around maintenance and operations because I work with a lot of rail clients. So you can imagine once you've handed over an infrastructure and there's a digital representation of that infrastructure, that's got to be maintained and operated. They'll use that as their maintenance product. We're not quite there yet, but I think there's a bit of a maturity mapping that needs to happen alongside whatever we do with digital engineering. And we just need more people to get interested in it. So you should head up me and Mathilde, if you're interested.
It's actually a really good point about the commercial model, because for me, that's what I see at the biggest hindrance at the moment to fully adopt it. In my view, and it's a bit controversial, so some of the listeners might actually disagree with it. But what digital engineering did is just doing risk mitigation much earlier. So before, the designer just had to do like a design and say typical section looks like that. And then contractor, you sort it out on site when you have clashes and how actually everything is going to fit all along, your asset. And that was for the contractor to deal with it. Then we said, wouldn't it be easier and cheaper to actually do a coordinated, design? Which is all started, and stemmed like the whole beam of saying like, we need to coordinate the design. We need to exchange information in a way that makes sense. But for the designer, there's very little incentive because it's more work for them now to work in complete 3D and make sure that the entire asset in 3D is completely clash-free, rather than just saying typical section. And then when the wall is a bit wobbly or does a little bit something weird, it's for the contractor to sort it out. So I don't think they've actually been really incentivized to do it. I think there've been a lot of push in terms of now this is what you need to do it in contracts and all that, but they never be incentivized financially to do it. And we see now the same issue where the design and constructor are incentivized to use, digital engineering and all the element of it and 3D modeling and GIS and integrating project control and all that to make sure that they deliver a quality asset on time and on budget and trying to, streamline efficiencies on site and make it safer. But there's no incentive to then hand over all that data and check operation and maintenance data or consider it early on. And I think if we were having a commercial model, and that might be a bit naive or idealistic, but that's listen, you're a DNC or you're an alliance or whatever, if actually you can show me that, by doing a design or changing your design, you can do a 10% reduction saving or whatever, in operation and maintenance costs, you get 2% of that back. That would be a massive incentive for them. And we could do the same in sustainability, of saying, well, if actually, you take a bit more time to understand how someone is going to access that weird room in order to do the maintenance, and you can actually make it a little bit nicer about maybe just having a door rather than another wall where you can check cable on it, it's like, and having a hatch at the top. It's safer, it's nicer, save us time in operation and maintenance, you're going to be rewarded for that. And I think that's what we are missing currently in this industry, is that people are very focused on their section. I'm just a designer. Once it goes on site, don't really care. Just have a couple of RFI. I'm a contractor. I'm a builder, constructor. Don't really care how it's designed. I just want something that can be, constructible. And then I will just change my methodology and put RFI. And then I'm an operator and I just receive whatever I have and I have to make do. I think if people start to think of themselves as a cog in the wider machine rather than an individual system, it will work much better. And I think contracts are a great way to incentivize that mindset. Everyone wants money at the end of the day, let's be honest,
Yeah.
So that would be a great way to do it.
That's a great point as well around, I think we've talked about it, the evolution of projects is really about the fusion of skills and getting rid of these verticals. I mean, we're still stuck in the same organizational structures that deliver the same outcomes, which are never good, right? All these big mega projects are always late, over budget, over schedule, so when we need to change something fundamentally. And I think digital engineering is a really exciting space because it does combine a whole bunch of skills. You're not just stuck as a one-trick pony anymore. You can be multifaceted and still stay within that domain, very similar to project controls in that space. And I do see the two converging at some point, or even PMO. And I do think that those that are closer together, Mathilde would attest to as well, is those that are closer together, project controls and digital engineering, will be better off because they do touch a lot of the same information. But what we want to get to with the future with this, and I'll ask Mathilde this in a second, is this visually immersive environment, right? Where it's fun to come to work and it's interactive to come to work. We're not just sitting in front of MS Teams at home, in our hoodies. You know, we want to be part of something bigger, right? That's the whole point of getting into projects. We want to contribute to something bigger. It's a goal, you know, as a tribe, we get together and we want to deliver something fantastic that is meaningful. And, you know, in 40 years, you can say, oh, I built that, you know, I was there. But we're not seeing that I guess that excitement, that enticement, that engagement. And I think for a lot of the people that represent these big projects, they are really just worried about their own, you know, their own garden, rather than looking at the wider piece of work. So Mathilde, for you, what would great look like in the digital engineering space? You know, where would you see this kind of building us out to from a futuristic perspective?
I think it's definitely going to look something like a digital twin. So people don't access information in like Excel or PDF or, you know, like store somewhere on a SharePoint that is titled newest and then a date and then newest and truly new, you know, those kind of things. I think model is going to become, or I hope model is going to become really part and center of everyone's daily life. You want an information, you want to know, you know, volume of concrete, you want to know on a technical basis for structural engineering, or for MEP or architects, you know, you go into the model, your project control, you want to understand an area, you open it and you zoom around this area, you can see your risk geolocated. You're a planner, actually all the elements, or I did with a phase, and you can see, you know, like you can do like time rehearsal, those kind of things. I think it really looks like that. And I think every single project now needs to have a room somewhere in their project offices, or even for the community to go and interact with that data. That's the best way. Some projects start doing it, like we can mention Cross River Rail in Brisbane, that have like a fantastic experience center when you can go in an entire room and it's all 360 and you can drive through, you know, what it's going to look like internal, those kind of things. But that should be the norm. I would expect that to be the norm in 10, 15 years, because we are visual people, you know, everyone understand data or understand what we are trying to achieve in a visual way much easily than just looking at a spreadsheet for a number and trying to make sense of the different columns and try to do that, you know. If we can make it easy for people to digest the information, that's how you increase your understanding. And then hopefully that will trigger enough thinking for people to get excited and say, oh, what if we change that? What if we do it a little bit differently this time? What if, you know, and that's how you improve and get it better. There's also the fact that if you provide that to community, you get a much better community engagement and, you know, social license to operate and backup from the community, because as a taxpayer money, you know, there's a lot of time when you're like, what did they do in this project? You know, they scrapped the road and then put it back and it looks pretty much the same, you know, and then for 2 years I had to drive on one lane, you know, and it cost millions, what I've heard, and it was late. And, you know, if actually you can go to a center or have this information online and, you know, put your VR headset and walk through it and say, actually, we did this for that and all those reasons, that would be fantastic. People will say, yeah, okay, fine. Happy to pay my tax because I can see what they're trying to do, you know, and how are you going to make my life better? So definitely that,
absolutely. Yeah, I said the same thing. I think, you know, you mentioned Cross River. I mean, that is the standard. If you could walk into a room, and I think it's the questions that you ask when you can visually see something, because anyone, even someone not educated in that space, can walk in and go, can I ask a dumb question? What was that? Should that be the, you know what I mean? So you give this fresh perspective on something by making it dimensional rather than, and I think that's why I like project controls, because it's not just one way. You're getting a feed in from different facets and you're like, well, that doesn't really add up. So it's about just driving logic into the programs again, because I think we've been giving senior management too much creative license to come up with their own decisions, and they shouldn't be, right? They should be data-driven and outcome focused. So if we had something that was visually immersive, everyone could see the answer, and it makes it very difficult for you to make the wrong decision under pressure, right? Because again, we know in projects, it's time under tension. It's very difficult. You're pressurized. It's political. There's a commercial refresh every 3 days. Everyone's kind of jostling between what they say to the client and what they actually do. So how do we make that more transparent? And I think for the client as well, it builds a better relationship, because you're now delivering expectations and they can see where you're going. And if there are delays, you can talk about that great question, what if? Okay, well, this isn't going to work for us. What if we did it this way? And what if we did it this way? And we're working collaboratively. And I think that's the whole intention, right? We start off like that in projects, and then obviously money gets in the way and people's egos. But if we can come back to a consensus, I think we are, as you said, at heart, visually inspired people. And if we can see projects that make sense to us, Well, that gets one problem out the way. Now we can move on to actually solutioning, which I think is fantastic. But I want to bring Dale back in. I know he's got a few questions for you, Mathilde, so I'll let him have the reins.
No, it's awesome listening as always. I'm picturing, you know, in this virtual room, you start off with this little virtual hologram, right? And then you can zoom into the front door or whichever door you want or whichever window you want and go into it, expand and then look at the ceilings, and all of a sudden it's, you know, real size. And then you could be tiny and looking down at the cornices and going, oh shit, the plug's in the wrong place. You know, all that could be brilliant, right? And then as soon as you want to move the plug from that point to a little bit higher, because it has to go with building rigs, it automatically calculates the cost of moving that and the risks associated with moving that and the teams and the order of work. Imagine, right? The possibilities. But there's the but. We have such, as you said, slow adoption rates. And I just think back to things like risk management, right? Which has been around forever, QSRAs and Monte Carlo analysis, and it's promised to help us, you know, be a bit more certain in our predictions and things like that. And as much as it's been around, people have just gone, okay, yep, great. It's been in contracts, yet we failed to actually fully grasp it and use that data. Yes, we got more advanced techniques and 3D, 4D, BIM, you know, digital engineering. So that's a bit of a challenge I see in terms of adoption. But I also wonder, when you were talking, Mathilde, around the commercial nature, the contracts, do companies overvalue data? Because one of the things I think stopping people incentivizing sharing of data is they think that if I share my data, I lose my commercial advantage. Yet once that project is finished, guess what? There's better information. So what's the point of holding on to it, right? So do we overvalue data in the project space?
I think the potential of data is there, and I think that's where it's being priced at the moment, or the potential of what could do with it. But as you said, in reality, this potential is not achieved. So I would agree that it's a bit overvalued at the moment. There's also we need to realize that some company have made an entire commercial model, or some industry, or the entire commercial model is based on the fact that data is not being shared. So a bit of controversial here, but for example, surveying.
Yeah.
Surveying, the way it works for utilities is that you call the utility provider, you get some sort of, you know, location and all that, and then you always send someone to survey it on site. The survey tell you, no, it's actually a little bit different quality, grade, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Then, so you pay for that data, then you don't share it. The surveying company doesn't share it neither. Got a call 2 days later for someone literally a meter down the road, and they go back to it and do it the same. You know, if you had shared the data, they wouldn't have to do 2 trips, and they can still monetize the fact that I don't know how, you know, whether it's how the business model needs to change, but you can still monetize the fact that you access maybe a paid database that is regularly surveyed and all that, you know. But there's a lot, you know, there's a lot of efficiencies where it's not necessarily in interest of all business to share data. I think it's also a bit of being risk adverse. People don't want to be liable for data that they've put out there. And because I don't think we really understand this space at the moment and how data is going to be used and that potential, that's why people are holding back, of saying, I would rather just deliver exactly what's in the contract than giving you a little bit more, and then suddenly the data is being used in a way I haven't foreseen and it's not accurate for that or whatever, and I don't have a legal caveat to cover me, and suddenly I'm liable for damages or, you know, like wrong decision making and this. So I think there's definitely some space, some work that has to be done in that sort of contraction legal to try to understand, okay, where's the liability lies, you know, like if a designer does something and for whatever reason, you know, sometime it falls through the cracks and you've done your QA/QC, but the benefit that you were expecting on putting that piece of equipment is actually not realized, as the operation and maintainer, you know, company, do they have a case to turn around and say, designer, you owe me money because you were saying that this I will have to maintain, I don't know, you know, only every 5 years is actually not true, or you were saying that I will save 10% by doing that, it's not true, I'm doing much more time, you know, it's all those kind of things. So I think at the moment, yes, we overvalue the value of data, but I think it's more from a risk management perspective that it's coming from, rather than just saying that data is not very useful and just share it.
No, good points. And I think, and maybe we're honing in on data specifically, and maybe it's around how we align our contracts to say that actually when the benefits are delivered, the full supply chain wins together, rather than you deliver your bits and you win, you deliver your bits and you win, and there's liabilities in between. To say we're in this together, as you say, and once the full benefits are delivered, we can win together. But I want to bring it back and rewind a little bit, because you mentioned a few times throughout how the UK is more advanced than Oz. What is the UK doing differently that Oz isn't? What are those specifics that those listening go, okay, I can see what it is now that the UK is doing, but you're probably going to tell me the UK is not doing it all either. So what are the missing bits beyond that as well?
So I think the big key for the UK and for driving adoption is the fact that the government mandated for every government project BIM level 2. So they say that it needs to be, that's the standard. You can't win a project if you're not BIM level 2, if you can't deliver a BIM level 2 project. And because government or the major clients for infrastructure, it forced the whole industry to raise up on saying, okay, it becomes the standard. Because everyone is then sort of trained and upskilled and can deliver that, the private sector is like, yeah, if I'm not going to pay much more and I'm going to get better quality, so then they start mandating BIM level 2. I think it's really that driving the adoption from the top down. Some people argue that it's still not there and they keep delaying and all that, but there's definitely that drive and that ambition. There's also the fact that they've unlocked a lot of money to do research. So for example, Center for Digital Build Britain is partly funded by the government, I believe. And it's all about looking at, okay, what the future look like. Digital twin, tell me, give me a roadmap. What's the white paper? What's the maturity? How we access that? Not just like the pretty picture of flying cars and everything is singing and dancing. It's actually, okay, we have the vision. How do we get there? And I think that some other governments and countries around the world are trying to, do the same mandate. For example, Dubai mandated BIM for some towers. I think it was over 25 level. Maybe now that has changed because that was a few years back. Singapore. So I think for us in Australia, that's where it's a bit missing, because some of the states are really mandating that. We mentioned Victoria being pretty advanced. But for example, in New South Wales, you don't have a mandate at the moment. It's only transport for New South Wales. So good thing that they do all the infrastructure, but there's a lot of other projects, that, for example, hospital could benefit from it that are not captured at the moment. And I think that's really that. It needs to be, if we want change in this industry, I think it needs to be really driven by a stick and a carrot approach. And if we don't have the carrot, then it needs to be a stick, and it needs to be like, you're not going to get any work if you don't do it, because now our benchmark is this, and that's it. And there's no, there's no exemption, there's no waiver. It's like, this is it.
No, that's awesome. And I guess just one last one. This is a complete segue. You talk about visualization, and I'm sure you've seen NEOM, that project.
Yes.
And you see the visualization that they're putting out there, right? And you can picture it, right? And maybe, Val, we should try and get someone on from NEOM. But wow, visualization so powerful. So there's, I think, a great example of what visualization can do to go, how might things turn out, what are the benefits, because it's all encompassing, the circular economies, how it's self-sufficient, all that type of thing. But you can see it's not just written down in reams of pages. So really, really fascinating stuff. Look, where to from here for folks? If they go, okay, Mathilde, you've sold me, where do I start? I mean, other than the communities, where do I start? How do I, does it depend which role I'm in now, or can I start at the same place regardless?
I think you can start anywhere. I think for me, the first thing is, rather than jumping onto a shiny tool and trying to get the latest and shiniest, because your mate liked to post on LinkedIn or whatever, and that, is look at process. Look at aspect of your life where you're using data from someone else by copying and pasting somewhere, or by, getting something in a report that then you copy and paste into your own spreadsheet to use it, and try to streamline that. If we manage to have this flow of data and information, ultimately we're going to connect back to the model, So if you're a planner and you get your cost from a PDF report from a cost engineer, maybe start, questioning why can't you get the Excel, or why can't you get the live data, or, how can it be changed to make sure that you connect on all that source of truth? I think it's really that. And then be curious, I will say. It's also about that, try to come with an open mind of saying, like, maybe the process that we've been doing for the past 25 years is not the best. I'm not saying it's the worst one, but maybe it can be improved on. And how cool would it be to be the person improving on that process, and then coming onto the podcast to chat about it. So, it's really about that, having that mindset of saying it's almost continuous improvement, but having that length of data model. What can I use from the model that will avoid, intermediate and potential mismatch, potential inaccuracy, potential errors?
Fantastic. Great advice there. And one last one before we sort of head towards the end. We spoke before we hit record, and Val was also, I haven't heard about that before. Digital thread. Can you explain what that is? It's not just, taking a haberdashery into the virtual space, is it?
No, it's not about suing in the metaverse, So what it is, digital thread, is saying that you have a thread of information from beginning to end that is uninterrupted. So some people refer to it also as the golden thread or thread of information. And it's basically trying to do that, of saying, like, you have a source of truth. It's almost like a funnel of information that people access at different points, but no one takes away from the funnel. You just access it, or no one starts creating, a branch. It's the same information that you just enrich and put in so that everyone has visibility. And it's all about saying that if we have a single source of truth, likelihood is that the data is going to be correct and more accurate, and then more consistent. So you can actually make decisions all based on the same set of data, rather than saying, oh, but I used last month, but I used last quarter, and but actually it's not the redesign. It's about the baseline, and it's about the reset, and all those terminology. That means that you have 3 different interpretations. So it's really about that, of saying, that's what we need to preserve, and that's what every function needs to be very careful of. You cannot break the data. You can input into it and enhance it. You cannot take away. You cannot change it to then do your own interpretation. It's about everyone access the same, pool at heart. And thread, because it's going from planning all the way to decommissioning, through operation and maintenance and construction and all that.
Awesome. It almost sounds like blockchain-ish, but maybe, and I will say it to end on, maybe we'll pull that thread and have you back on a future episode. But
that joke.
Yeah, exactly. No, honestly, I feel like there's so much that we haven't got from you yet, because you are just a plethora of information, and thank you, for spending the best part of an hour with us. But we're not going to let you go just yet. We're going to hand over to Martin to take you through your paces.
Sounds
Thanks,
good.
Dale. We have a little pop quiz at the end of shows. It's a section called Fiverr, so 5 quick fire questions all about yourself. So if you're ready, we can make a start.
Okay, ready.
Okay, number 1. What's your one piece of advice for people new to the project profession?
Don't assume that everything is perfect just because we've been doing it for 20 years.
Brilliant. Number 2, what's the biggest misconception about digital engineering?
That we are tech nerd.
Number 3, a good leader's born or made?
Ooh, I would say made.
Interesting. What would be your book recommendation to our listeners?
It's actually a fiction called The Power from Naomi Alderman. It really blows your mind. It's actually a really good one. So have a look. I'm not going to spoil it, but it's like a fiction to give you a different perspective on current life. It's really good.
Brilliant. And last one, if you had your time again, would you go straight into digital engineering, project management, academia, data analytics, other?
No, digital engineering, not straight. I think I think my little detour through structural engineering actually served me really well. So I don't think I will change anything on that one.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot for that.
Awesome. As we said, Mathilde, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and we definitely have to have you back. But before we let you go, any final thoughts that you want to leave our listeners with?
No, just about hammering again. Be curious. Don't assume that, because the process has already been done like that, it's the best way, and try to question yourself around data and information. But thank you very much for having me. It's been really fun. So yeah, the hour flew by. So really good. Thank you very much.
It absolutely does fly by, especially when, you've got so much information and, it's such a short time to share it all. Val, any final thoughts from you?
No, I mean, I love digital engineering because it is a disruptor. So, working with Tilt is such joy. We love doing it. And, there's massive applications for this, for people to, really, really think about it, not just in projects either. I think digital engineering in education, imagine walking into an immersive visual room and learning about history or language or whatever it's going to be. That's where it should be, just for all those educators out there. But thanks, Mathilde, for your time. Really, really appreciate it as usual.
Thank you very much.
Thank you indeed. Folks, there you have it. That's all we've got on this episode. But remember, if you like what you've heard, please do help us pay it forward by sharing a link on this episode to your favorite social media platform. A massive thank you once again to our guest, and let's see if I can get it right, Mathilde Roubi.
Yes.
There we
go.
Well
done. Close enough.
And thank you all for listening, folks. Till next time, we say stay safe, be disruptive, and have fun doing it. From me, Val, and Martin, it's bye for now.